When you're trying to pin down exactly how much moisture is in a batch of corn, a sludge cake, or even a fine powder, you're not just looking for a gadget that spits out a number. You need something that fits into the workflow of a lab or a production line without turning the whole process upside down. That's why a lot of people hesitate before buying a moisture analyzer. The fear of spending a lot of money on a machine that sounds great on paper but ends up being a hassle to calibrate, a nightmare to clean, or simply not precise enough for the subtle differences that matter in their daily work. If you've been wrestling with inconsistent results, spending extra time on manual drying methods, or worrying that a cheap handheld unit will just give you a good enough reading that later throws off your product quality, you're looking for reliability, ease of use, and genuine value for the money you're putting down. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. The A&D Engineering ML50 is positioned as a mid-range moisture analyzer, and it actually reflects a balance between the high-end lab instruments you'd see in a university research setting and the more basic handheld units that many small workshops resort to. What makes this model stand out is its 51-gram capacity paired with 5 mg resolution. In plain language, that means you can weigh a sample just a bit larger than a typical teaspoon and still see changes in moisture content down to the 1/5 of a gram, which is precise enough for most food processing, environmental, or chemical applications where you need to track small variations without the instrument screaming out of range. The fact that it's built in Japan adds a layer of confidence for many buyers because Japanese manufacturing often carries a reputation for tight quality control and reliable component sourcing. If you're running a medium-sized lab that processes multiple sample types each day, say, a grain testing facility that checks moisture for both corn and wheat, or an industrial wastewater lab that needs to monitor sludge moisture during treatment, this machine can slot nicely into your routine. The memory function allows you to store measurement conditions, so you don't have to re-enter the same temperature or drying time each time you run a similar batch. That's a practical time saver when you have to repeat the same test over and over. The large, bright vacuum fluorescent display makes it easy to read numbers at a glance, even in a well-lit lab or a dimmer environment where you might be dealing with sludge. Those little usability touches add up when you're trying to keep the workflow smooth. On the flip side, the ML50 isn't the kind of instrument you'd hand to a casual user with no training. The interface, while straightforward, assumes you know the basics of setting drying temperatures and interpreting moisture percentages. If you're a hobbyist or a small business that only occasionally needs to check moisture levels, you might find the learning curve a bit steep, especially compared to a simple handheld hygrometer that just gives you a rough estimate. Also, because the capacity caps at just over 50 grams, you can't use it for very large bulk samples without taking multiple subsamples, which can add a bit of extra handling time if your process revolves around large-scale measurements. One practical strength that shows up in real-world labs is the consistency of the results. Users who have swapped the ML50 into existing workflows often report that the readings line up closely with reference methods, such as gravimetric oven drying, but in a fraction of the time. The drying cycle on the ML50 can be tuned to a specific temperature range, which helps you avoid overheating a delicate powder that might degrade if you used a higher temperature. This flexibility means you can keep the sample's integrity intact while still getting an accurate moisture figure, something that's a genuine concern for formulators working with heat-sensitive ingredients. However, there are some hidden trade-offs you'll want to consider. The vacuum fluorescent display, while bright, does drain the unit's power a bit faster than an LCD would. If you rely on battery operation for fieldwork, you may find you need to keep the charger handy, which could limit portability. The unit also runs on a standard AC adapter. There's no option for battery-only operation out of the box. For a laboratory that's permanently set up on a bench, this isn't a problem, but if you're trying to take the analyzer on the road for on-site testing, you'll need to think about power access. Another point that often surprises buyers is the cleaning routine. Because you're dealing with potentially sticky or oily samples, think sludge cakes or powdered feed, the chamber can accumulate residues over time. The ML50 is designed with a removable sample pan that can be taken out for cleaning, but the process does require a bit of patience to make sure no debris is left behind. If you're planning to switch between very different sample types regularly, you'll want to allocate a few minutes after each run to wipe down the pan and